So we're gonna say what's going on, everyone. How you doing out there, fellas? How things going? Yes, chime in. Let's welcome everybody to Manhood Moments. How things going with you?
Everything is well over
We're
here.
good. We're good. We're good.
Good deal, man.
All
I'm
good.
excited. I'm telling you, man, I've been just chomping at the bit about this conversation. And so I don't want to delay, but I want to just welcome everybody that's joining us today. Thank you for tuning in to Manhood Moments, which is one of the podcasts hosted by No More Hiding. We're here every first and third Thursday. Wherever you're watching us, that's where we are, right? And at 7 o'clock Central Time. Our purpose is to really have conversation, authentic conversation, real conversations with men, black men, right? Who are involved in the community, who are doing life-changing things. And these are your everyday brothers who you could call, who you will see in the community, see at the grocery store, and just really highlight the impact that black men are having in the community. So that's Manhood Moments. No more hiding. The purpose of No More Hiding is to allow men to come out of that space of hiding. We know that sometimes being a man, in particular a black man, is very challenging. We wear a lot of masks. We have a lot of responsibilities and titles, but No More Hiding allows men to just be their authentic selves. And so we're going to invite you to partner with us. We're going to invite you to join us. We're excited about everything that God is doing because it is God, right, who does these things for us. So we're excited about what's going on. However, tonight, this is part two of a conversation that we probably could have kept going and going and going on. And so we have some great hosts here. We got some great guests that's at the table. Fellas, once again, chime in how things going out there, how things happening with you.
Things are good. Things are
Yeah.
good. Things are good. Like you in St. Louis and treading through the snow, but still feeling blessed. Things are good.
Good deal, Dr. Pearson, man. We're happy to have you today. So T-Bird, what's happening? Of course, always at the desk, always at the table.
I'm doing well, man. Family's doing well. Stop by my parents' house to make sure my dad wasn't out doing too much. So I'm gonna beat him early tomorrow morning and clear his driveway. My oldest is good and safe. So hey, we got a lot of snow like when we're little, but everybody's good.
Good deal. Dr. Jones, how you doing up there, man? I know you kind of went through this past Sunday. You doing all right?
Hey, you know what? My Jayhawks got blown out by Kentucky, and then the Chiefs sat down and laid down their life for the life of the Bengals second half. And but I'm surviving, man. I'm surviving. Things are going well. Hey, second snow day for us. We didn't get that much snow, but with the cold and with them unable to clear the streets, we had to take another day off. So, of course, as you all know, our work never stops. So we keep working from home. But things are going well. Family's healthy. I'm glad to be a part of this conversation again. I look forward to the discussion with all of you intellectuals and us being able to hear what the public is saying as well. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of this space.
That's it. Dr. Pickett, you on the other side, your team actually won, right? They came out on the top, so they're going to LA on the 13th. How you doing today, brother?
I was so glad you brought me on after Dr. Jones. Yes, I'm on the other side of that. We earned that one. We needed this. This is a good time for us in our city. But I'm on the flip end of that. There's a lot of snow up there and everything else. I'm down here dealing with the rain. And so we're getting the opposite. It's really weird that it's 60-ish degrees weather and rain and warm. So even for us, that's kind of interesting. But all is well. As Dr. Jones said, listen, this is a great time to be alive, and we're here. Even more so, I get an opportunity to be with these brothers again and talk with them. I enjoyed the conversation last time. Yes. I learned so much, got my note. I still got my pad ready to take some more notes. So I'm excited. And again, grateful, Dr. Sir, for just placing us together to have this discussion. So I'm excited.
Good deal. And of course, we got Dr. Payne. How you doing today, brother?
I'm okay. Honestly, I'm just glad that the work day is over with. I'm not enjoying the snow, but I thank God for the snow because we have a snow day tomorrow, and he knew that we needed a mental break. So I'm definitely going to embrace it full fledged. And I'm definitely looking forward to the conversation. Again, I had a lot of people that watched last time that, really enjoyed it. So I'm just looking forward to part 2.
Good deal, good deal. And Dr. Pearson,
Yes, sir.
how are things going with you, man? I know you in St. Louis with the snow, but how are things going? You had an event, right? You hosted at your
Right.
church. So how
Right,
did it go?
right. The crux of it was, whenever I've thought about Martin Luther King Day, I get to a certain point. It's like, well, I appreciate the speeches and reliving the biography. The whole idea of him being seen as a critical thinker and a problem solver and a strategic leader made me think this year about doing something different. So what we did is we pulled together what I call five change makers, individuals who are active in the community, but who are allowing their faith to drive their actions. So we had a great conversation and some great interaction. Individuals who are working on incarceration, prison reform, others who are working on housing and tending to the homeless, others who are working on political change. So just really great conversation. But the key was all of them active, but all of them are committed to the faith. So it was a great way to celebrate Dr. King. Great way to do it. So thank you for giving me a chance to talk about it, brother. I appreciate it.
Most definitely. And of course, we know he's probably watching us. He's up in Seattle right now, but we got T. Patrick. And brother, we missed you at the table. Just letting you know that this is your space. We know you belong here, but work calls. And so hopefully you're not enjoying yourself or working too hard. Hopefully there's a balance there. So we'll see you in another 2 weeks. And so, Matt, we want to jump right into the conversation. And those who heard you last time and those who are tuning in for the first time, they're in for a real treat. So the question I want to bring up and ask as to start this conversation is, oftentimes I've looked at that No Child Left Behind reform, right? And we know that was supposed to be the solve all. That was supposed to create equity and equality in our schools or what have you, But I gotta ask you all, what's your thoughts about that particular reform, that policy, and how has that impacted where we are now? So educate us, talk a little bit about that.
Well, I can start.
Okay.
I won't say I'm an authority on it, but I remember that was in the first years of my teaching, of my education. I started teaching in 2001, and No Child Left Behind Act happened soon after. It sounded good. It did expose some things that were going on in our school systems. At the time, I was serving in a different district, a large school district in Kansas City, Kansas, and I noticed as a teacher this accountability assessment that we were taking every year, but I noticed how low our scores were, and I finally looked at the test and I said, I understand why our students are scoring so far below, because the time that they're taking it as a sophomore, they're not even taking the appropriate math that they need in order to be ready for the test. They were a course level below. And so it awakened some things. Our district at that time, we started really shaking up the amount of the type of math that we were delivering to our students, and we were being very intentional. But as time has gone on, and as a lot of things become politicized, it makes you wonder, especially with those who were influential in bringing this legislation to head. And now it ended up having bipartisan support, but now that we look at it and I see how legislators have tried to do away with public schools as we know it and bring in more of school of choice, and those of us in St. Louis and Kansas City school districts that are the urban districts, we felt like there was this intentional push to try to take over and to move out. And of course, you see the numbers of students that are enrolled in those schools have diminished. So I wonder what other things were put into play when they thought of this idea of No Child Left Behind, because it forced us to then focus more on assessments, focus more on tests. And with that, there's a lot of chaos that was created. So it wasn't the best solution. As we see, it wasn't the best solution. It sounded good, felt good for a moment, but I don't believe that it took us to where we needed to go.
You know,
And I'll just
the thing that struck me about it was, as you look at it now, it literally changed the focus of instruction. You know, we talk about the fact that education has to be a local issue, but inadvertently, No Child Left Behind changed the way we taught, changed the way the way lessons was designed. It changed when we taught what in the classroom. It did all of those things. And while I fully believe that accountability is good, in that law, accountability became a dirty word. And then what really happened is when you look up and a district is struggling, rather than there appearing to be help for you, it suddenly became punitive. And that changed the whole environment. So I think those were some huge cultural issues that went way beyond educational. It literally changed all of those things from my perspective. And that's early on, and it has evolved and evolved and evolved until every state department in the nation just began trying to figure out what we need to do to get those, what I call now points driven. Points. If it can't be measured, it is of no value. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge.
Yeah, and I was gonna add, like, I started teaching in 2007, and it was like kind of right at the height of No Child Left Behind, and like right away, it was very evident that it definitely created a school environment that was very competitive, and schools that did not meet like the standards basically were punished because in my first teaching assignment in this particular district, like every year our schools, like were rated and, like you received, like an accreditation, non-accreditation and all of that. So like the schools that did not get like non-accredited, like we knew those were the schools that, were scoring low. And then it put extra pressure on us as teachers and put extra pressures on the principals as well, because the goal was, to raise the test scores, and not only raise the test scores, but like our pay was dependent upon our performance. So that's when the whole teaching to the test, really blew up and took off because, we really couldn't be, creative in the classroom anymore because it was like, okay, you have to teach to this test in order to get a raise. It was no more of like every school year, like you would get a raise. Your raise was based off of your performance. And so then that's when I started seeing, honestly, a lot of teachers cheating, because they wanted to show that, oh, okay, well, we're using this school-wide assessment. So I want to show that, like my data is great so I can get all of these accolades. But my pushback that I used to give my coworkers, I would be like, okay, but at the end of the year, you still have to account for the state assessment. So like you can cheat all you want to on the district assessments, but what really matters is is the state assessment. And so unfortunately, not just in Missouri, but like in other states as well, you started seeing all of these cases where school district superintendents and principals were getting called to the carpet because they were cheating and teaching to the test because there was a lot of pressure that was put behind it.
And I will tell you, probably one of the most noticeable areas was down here that made national attention. Our Atlanta public schools, if you remember, during that time, the late Beverly Hall, who is no longer living, they were causing teachers. A lot of teachers felt pressured to do so. And then, of course, they had this whistleblowing thing to where people were ultimately possibly losing their jobs because they were exposing. There were bonuses and things that were associated with these statewide testing. And there were things like you had 11th graders who were taking these tests, and these parents were going on the news frustrated because their child was not passing the test. But in essence, they were also stating you were more concerned their child was not passing this test and they were cheated, but you weren't upset that your child was on an 11th grader reading on a 5th grade reading level. Yeah. And that was a concern for me. You were more concerned. And that became the model mindset of the test. The major problems that I saw, particularly down here in Georgia with the No Child Left Behind, because I like you, Dr. Payne, started around that same time frame. I was in 06. And so one of the things that I started realizing, it did two things. Number one, me being a supporter of school choice to a certain degree, this particular legislation did open up a slight can of worms without giving explanation to what school choice actually meant. And what it did was it started kind of piecing together, and which has now caused many people to have this sour taste of school choice in their mouth, because it kind of threw something out there and it didn't provide a space. And because of that, you still today see more Republicans in favor of school choice than you see Democrats, even though it really benefits children who live in Democratic states or Democratic areas. So that was one thing it did not do well. The second thing that I think No Child Left Behind did, it did the same thing that Common Core did when it first came out. You push Common Core out there, you put this out there, and then you didn't provide any type of education for teachers. You didn't provide any type of training for educators. And so what then happened was you're expecting these educators to explain this, and you have not provided them the resources and provided them the way to do so. So even though Common Core had good spaces and areas, what it did was it started setting the students up for failure, because you did not create a space where teachers and educators could actively and effectively do this. So you did it backwards. You eventually did that. The third thing it did, and the final thing I'll say, is we allowed non-educators to make decisions on education. And what that did was you provided a legislation back in 2001, which has become a major problem, where you're putting these people in positions where you're allowing them to make decisions for our children, and they have no goddamn reason doing that, because they have no understanding or sense. Just because you have children in school don't mean you know nothing about school. Just because you have got, you've dealt with, individuals who may have, you may have watched some kids. It takes you really meeting with people who've done that. How do I know this? Because of the fact that when No Child Left Behind came out 3 days after the 43rd president of the United States of America took office. It came out 3 days. He initiated that. And I know for a fact that he did not bring together that great bipartisan conversation, but there were still not enough people at the table. So those three things for me surely solved the problem. And I think if they would have brought more educators to the table and brought this at the forefront, it could have had a great impact, because there were good points in there: reading across curriculum, accountability. There were good things that were in there, but I don't think that they provided the people that could have actually helped that come across.
Let me add one more thing too, though, because I think this was important. And our own being the oldest guy here, so some of these conversations happened when I was there. The first legislation, when the first concept really was No Child Left Behind in education, in housing, in healthcare. It was more comprehensive, because the truth of the matter is you cannot change a child's life around education without mitigating for all the other factors in their life.
Yeah.
Then it shifted to the political conversation, and the political conversation became just about the classroom. But this is a holistic challenge, and it was quickly done away. If you look at the original, all of those factors were covered, because anybody who has observed this knows you have to take a holistic approach to it. It's what I've been saying for a while, a collective impact. And so when you look at urban school districts now, I will always say the conversation around how the test scores went, pitting us against them, the unaccredited against the accredited, all of that, the conversation ought to be, how do we create a space where social services and housing authorities and law enforcement and counseling services and education can begin to align their work to support children, because our children are resilient now. They'll push through it. There's not an argument about that. It's not an argument. This has never been about our children's intellect, but it is about context. And I think that's the piece that I argue forever. You look at the scores, there are mitigating factors. They can learn. They do need to connect, but you can't just do this and then there'll be chaos everywhere else. And that was, the politicians didn't touch any of the rest of that at all.
Man, you are really just dropping some knowledge when we're talking about this, because one of the things that we notice is the fact of government control through utilizing the resources that these school districts need, right? So if you control the purse, if you control the dollars, then you get to make the control and get to have control over the curriculum. And I love what Dr. Pickett talked about with lack of understanding, right? And so now when we look at our school systems, one of the things that I'm gonna ask you to comment, to show your thoughts on this. One thing is, it don't matter necessarily about the performance, as long as we have a body in that seat, then we continue to get the money, because we're at a point where our school systems are really challenged fiscally to be able to stay afloat. What are you seeing in that space?
Well, I guess there's a complexity around it. It is true that there is funding associated with the child in the seat. But for example, years ago for a superintendent's main job was to be sure that all laws were followed, all policies were followed, and that there was appropriate resources, book in every hand, teacher in front of every student. But one of the things No Child Left Behind did is they made a shift. Now, superintendent candidly can lose their job if the academic performance isn't there. And if, for example, your scores are not at a certain place, when you end up going on probation or whatever the case may be, and this was earlier, you could end up losing people then because people begin to flee a district to go to another space. Now, I will say this, that, and I'm going to just be a broken record here, it isn't that learning wasn't important. It is that the way the learning in these districts was supported, that was the issue. That's always been the issue to me, both in the training, but also in the fact that points can cause you to lose, and then X amount of points not gained over a period of time can cause you to even be disbanded.
I just want to piggyback off a quick question. You guys were talking about wraparound services a little bit. I saw it in the chat. When I was a juvenile PO, there were times where I was called in to be part of supporting a kid. You had the mental health services coming in, if they had substance abuse, and then my role was to sit there, help out, and give any feedback you can. And then there were other times where as soon as they found out a kid was on probation, anytime he messed up, I got a phone call to go to the school to get him locked up or to come in with the muscle. So do you guys still adequately use wraparound services in that way with probation officers and law enforcement? Not as much.
In my former district, we put together a fairly aggressive wraparound services model. When I came on board, there literally were about 90 MOUs, memorandums of understanding. Every wraparound service that existed felt they had a solution to our challenge. When that happens, though, you end up managing all of those services and not necessarily being able to get to the children. So what we did was we created a model. We identified our goals in the district, and then we aligned each one of our goals with specific wraparound services to be sure that if this person was coming in, they were helping us reach this goal for this type of child. We began to develop a profile. Charles Pearson had an issue. We could very quickly say Charles Pearson has a challenge about food shortage. He may have a challenge around needing a trauma. He may have a challenge around this. And we could begin to align Charles's services with those wraparounds. So again, we could be very intentional. So DJOs and all of these individuals, everybody coming in, caseworkers, all of them are in our database, and we were very intentional. And you have to be that way. Different children need something different. And I think that's the other piece to recognize. But if you don't make that connection and align all of those services, what you end up doing is having a lot of piecemeal people coming and going, agency A not knowing what agency B or C is doing, them never meeting together to talk about the child, and therefore it gets to be ineffective. So there's a space for the DJO and all of those pieces, but it's got to be intentional. It just can't be a drop in and drop out.
And I can say that I'm sorry.
Oh, you go ahead. Right. Go right, Dr. Jones.
I want to say that I had the great fortune of working in Kansas City public schools, where as a principal and as a vice principal, I was able to work with some of the wraparound services. It was the first time I ever heard that phrase. And I remember my first year as a principal, the elementary school that I served at, that I was so excited. Different people wanted to come in and help. But then someone said, "Okay, you're bringing in these resources, but what are they doing?" And was grateful to have Caring for Kids, which is an organization that that helps us bring all of our community partners together, including those who are serving in wraparound services, and for us to be able to sit down at the table so that everybody can hear and see what's going on. What are you doing to contribute to the students of this particular school? What area are you able to support? So that way we didn't have people doing the same thing, or all of them doing the one thing, or doing things that were not going to be beneficial to our scholars. So it was really nice because that model allowed us a time once a month to be able to sit down for an hour and a half, couple of hours, and to talk about the goals that we had as a school, what each person or each entity was doing and offering for our schools. And it allowed us to be more intentional and more efficient. That's the thing. And two, I remember at one point we said, okay, there's some companies coming around, but because of the distrust that we had with the state, we also were understanding, as Dr. Bedell let us know, there's some people who don't mean us well, who are coming in to get all of our information. They're coming in to find things to try and throw darts and to throw other things at us to say that this is not working. So, I was blessed that we had quality folks that came in, but then you have to also be aware of who you bring in and what it is that they really want to offer to support the goals of your school system, of your school or your organization.
And then the piggyback to both of those points, I think one other thing that I think as pertains to wraparound services that I don't think a lot of school districts do well, and as pertains to educating their people, I don't think they teach their schools the best way to use their Title I funds. Because of the fact that if they use those Title I funds effectively, I think there's a lot of wraparound service there. There's a lot of way, because it goes back to Dr. Pearson and that holistic approach. A lot of times there are schools that have those parent liaisons that are in those roles in those areas to actually provide. We used to do what we call parent university, where in our school, we had a place where our parents could come and go and look for jobs, go file for food stamps, and they can actually go and get resources because they provided a space for those families to do that. So I think you have to also look at the resources that you actually do have in those schools internally that can assist and help those. So in essence, you can do what you can not do what not do. Dr. Jones is saying is not have to bring some of those people in who are doing the gotcha or catch you moments, but you have those resources in-house where you can make those opportunities, you can make those choices again. But again, I think these school districts have to do a better job teaching our schools. These are the ways that you can use your Title I funding to get the best use for your schools and for your families in that area.
And I'll just I'm gonna just piggyback off what Dr. Pickett said about the Title I funding, because when it comes to early childhood centers that are partnered with a school district, honestly, a lot of the times we don't get like a title budget per se, so we really do rely on like community outreach to provide like wraparound services, because unfortunately a lot of districts just really still don't value early childhood. Like early childhood is a buzzword, but it's they don't really like to put a lot of money into early childhood. So that's when like when I became the early childhood director, like we just became very innovative when we were bringing in wraparound services to our early childhood center, because we looked at like the needs of not only our students but the needs of the staff and the families as well. And typically in the early childhood setting, it's really going to always be around students' social emotional needs and educating the whole child. So when we did partner with different organizations like Alive and Well and the Little Bit Foundation, we had like a wraparound team at our school, and we would interview these people. It was very hardcore because we wanted to know, yes, you guys are coming in to help us, but we need to vet you. We need to check your background and see, are you really vested? Are you really going to do the work? Because I don't want you here if you're just going to use our name on your website and not do the work, because we had an expectation for every person that provided wraparound services in my school. Every month when I had PD, they had to attend the PD. They had to provide us, like with updates. And they also had to lead some PD sessions, because I really wanted my staff to understand who was in our building and the services that they provided. Because what I saw early on, quite honestly, it was a lot of my non-melanated teachers that were very quick to hotline my Black and brown babies. So I needed them to understand, how to effectively, everything doesn't have to be hotline. And, this is the process you take to do that, but also understand these are the services that, we have at our school, and that, that we provide. And so it worked for us, but a lot of school districts honestly are making a turn now when it comes to early childhood, because they're seeing that a lot of the issues that your elementary, middle, and high school students are having are issues that have, could have been helped or possibly even fixed if it was addressed when they were in early childhood. Because you do have a lot of students now that are attending preschool and going through the process. But unfortunately, a lot of early childhood centers just really don't have the funding. So that's why they really rely on the community outreach. But it's all in knowing your community, knowing your school, and knowing what's best. And so I always tell people it's important to, really interview these individuals and determine if it's really going to be a good fit.
There's a question that's on the screen. How connected are the community-based organizations to the schools and school districts that serve our students?
Well, I think one of the things you just heard, though, was the intentionality that all of us have talked about. And so they can be very connected, because for many nonprofits, a district that is struggling is like their dream come true for their mission statement. Because if they can get in there and have an impact, their board of directors loves them, their investors, their supporters love them. And so there is that vested interest on their end, but it takes the leadership in the system, in the district, to bring them to the table, to have them truly begin to understand the children they're serving, to actually be able to understand who they're really with. And that's why, again, I go back to us building it right into our strategic plan, so that they knew, we're looking at performance data, we're looking at academic data, we're also looking at how many children are served. We're looking at how much service did they get. We're then looking at what was the impact of the service they had. We're looking at what's the next step for that service, because you have to be asking all those very same questions if you want to have impact. The challenging thing is schools really shouldn't have to be doing this. And yet they are having to do this. And therefore, schools have to do this with the same intentionality that they have to do great instruction. It literally becomes just another continuum of services to children to help them get where they need to be.
The way that I look at that is that it does take a village to raise a child. So if we say that and we really believe it, well, this right here is a true opportunity for us to make it work and to put it into action. What I found many years ago as a teacher, and I was kind of told one time, man, focus on this. You're networking too much. But my brain never stops. And if I can see something in the community that can connect to my scholars, that can help them see something differently than how I could present it, because teachers are not experts of everything. We're thought to be that. We're thought to be the answer as educators, but there are people out there who are working in the fields that need to be connected with our scholars. Our scholars need to know what it looks like, feels like, breathes like. And as Dr. Pearson said, there are people waiting to try to save the day. Now, they can't save the day for everyone. However, if we're inviting, that was the one thing that I noticed. I had individuals that said, Dr. Jones, you're different from a lot of administrators. Well, I was, naive as a principal. I just felt like, hey, we've got people saying, I want to come in and I want to serve your scholars. Bring them in. Let's talk. Let's figure out what it is that you offer. And it was amazing, because some of my teachers even wondered, why are they coming in for us? I mean, we're this school. No one comes in and talks to us. And I said, well, why not? Our scholars deserve it. You deserve that. So it was changing that mindset. But then I also realized that some leaders who were very seasoned did not like individuals coming in. It could have been because of past history. They may have been burned. And I think sometimes you had individuals who just simply wanted complete control. And if they didn't have complete control, and if it didn't come out of their mouth, their mind, then they didn't want it to happen in their buildings. But what I have seen in my time as an educational leader is that I have noticed that when you bring those community members who really have a passion for that particular school or for that organization, they will do whatever they can to ensure that those scholars are getting the needs met. They will do it. I've seen them open up their wallets. I've seen them bring in their time. My first year as a principal, I had to open up a storage room because I had people coming in saying, I want to donate. Hey, Jarius, I see where you are. I see what you're doing. I want to give this to your school. I want to give that. Then it became a point of I needed to tell them I don't need more backpacks. I need some of this, that, the other. So I got a little more of telling them, okay, I need some more things, some more assets. And it came. But it was, as you all said, it was about being strategic, finding the needs of the scholars and my staff. As a staff, they also need that as well. You talked about the Title I dollars, and I don't want to go any further in that, but some school districts do it well and others don't, because sometimes the school district says, well, this is we have money coming, and maybe your school probably should get a bigger chunk of this, but this is how we're going to allocate it. And sometimes you may be left with $1,000, or in some cases you might be left with over $100,000 trying to spend. And I've been in that situation, both of those situations. And so you want the money to reach the students. You want it to reach to where the scholars can access it, and they have access to the materials. They have access to the instruction. They have access to the things that are needed. Teachers have access to make instruction come alive. But it also takes our educational leaders to make sure that the money is allocated properly so that we can make the gains and the moves that we need. It's unfortunate that early childhood education has not been valued as much. We have to make it a priority in our states. Everything is state run. I know that one of the current bills that's out there wants to fund early childhood education and provide that for all. Right now, it's either you have the money or you don't, or you're in the lowest realm of poverty, and you may have a seat somewhere in your community, but it's not for all. And I think that it would definitely change the scope and the trajectory of our scholars as they become kindergartners. And we have those expectations in kindergarten, first grade, and so on, if they were to get it prior to school. I know I jumped all over the map, but I was trying to make connections with all the things I heard.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that was good. We got another question out there. It says, and just kind of approach it. You share what you think are the top 3 issues of the education system, and are those issues similar in Atlanta, well, down in Georgia? So when we're looking at Kansas, looking at Georgia, we're looking at Missouri, right? So what's your thoughts? And maybe not top 3, maybe what you think would be the top, or an important issue.
So for me, I keep hearing Dr. Pearson in my ear. I keep hearing it because that, when we talk about those services, I think I think down here, one of the top issues that we're seeing specifically is, again, we do spend that energy and that time about what's happening in the building, but I also don't think we spend enough time what's happening outside the building, because of the fact that at the end of the day, we're creating opportunities for these babies in the building, but we forget that we only have them but for this much. And so if we're not providing assistance, if we're not maybe having connections with the housing authority, we're not having connections with some of these other entities, what are we sending them home to? And then we're concerned, but then we're wondering about, we get them the next day. So when we talk about that village, and I think Mrs. Rice was talking about it, we have to be very careful about what that village looks like. The second thing that I think, and I've never been an advocate for it, and so I might get chewed after this, we have to do a better way of providing a standard or assessment for our young people. I'm not a test person to determine the growth and development of a child. I have a problem sometimes with that. And that's how we attach the success to a child via that test. And I know that's the standard. I know that's what states do. I know that's what we have. But there are so many other factors within there to how to determine the child, especially if you're basing it off of one assessment at the end of the year. That I think that kind of has issues. I'm just speaking kind of from down here. And that kind of helps. That kind of hurts. There's a last issue that we have is I think how we do funding down here, and how we do our QBE, and how, you know, and our which is of course quality basic education. There's a formula for that. And so when you were talking about the money following, when we do our FTE counts and things of that nature, how the funding happens, and then of course how, you know, when a child leaves that school, and the money stays there, it doesn't necessarily go with the child, and so now you have schools that are being funded and the money's not following the child. And so those are three areas I think down here that I see that are crippling kids that look like us, and that is becoming our problem.
For me, I'll stop at three, but there are lots of challenges / opportunities. But equitable resources is critical, and the preparation of teachers to do this work in a variety of contexts is really a big deal. The researcher said a long time ago that the number one in-school factor for children thriving is a very effective teacher. Teachers solid in developing relationships, solid in instructional strategies, and solid in content knowledge. Next in there is the principal, who creates the space for those teachers to do a good job, and who creates and then brings in great teachers. About number 4 up the line will be superintendents looking at the whole system, but within a school system. And so that teacher, I don't see what teachers are having to step into now. It's just maddening. There was a little school in I thought about this for years ago, a little Greenwood College, I think, sitting in the middle of Illinois. There was no diversity there. And what that staff did is they got their teachers to do practicums and so forth in St. Louis Public and Normandy's and U cities, because they wanted their teachers to be sure they were equipped or aware of all the variety of children they may face that came from the backgrounds totally separate from theirs. So I would think resources first, actual the workforce second, but then equipping that workforce to be able to meet the challenges of today's context. And then finally, and I appreciate the idea of schools leading the charge for the community, but candidly, schools don't control that. So that's where there has to be some greater partnerships. We do control what's within our day. So you deal with what's the number one factor I can work with. But the number one factor outside of school is the parent. That's the number one factor. The child's first teacher is the parent. The parent has more impact than we have outside of school. In school, it's us. Therefore, figuring out how to partner with others, and I'll beat that drum to death, how to partner with others to meet those needs, because a school system just can't do it all alone.
Good stuff, man. This has been rich so far. If you're just joining us, we're talking with 4 of the most knowledgeable, expert Black male educators from Kansas, from Georgia, from St. Louis, from even experience in New Orleans, and we're just happy to have them joining us today. So if you are just joining us, man, please share it. Please share it. Let somebody know, hey, it's some great ideas that's going forth. There's some expert information, and please share your questions with us. We want to hear from you. Those of you who are listening in, we missed the question earlier, and I want to go to that question because we like to bring in our audience. There was a question talking about children being pushed to excel in sports because of the challenges they're having academically. And then the follow-up was, are we hoping that they'll catch up later? Right. So anybody want to take a stab at that question?
You know, it's an interesting question over in most systems, there still has to be a minimum GPA for children to even take the field. So in one sense, there is this embedded interest of coaches to be sure that their best players stay academically eligible. But now, how much that influences the desire for them to be truly seen as scholar athletes, I think that I don't know how systemically we deal with supporting that.
Okay. And so we have another question. Does the funding depend on the number of Black and brown children who have been identified as needing the funds within a certain time frame?
I don't see that necessary. I don't see it packaged in that manner. It's more of the at-risk, if you want to call it, factors, the weighting of the student of the funding. So I don't know if it's listed necessarily to any particular skin color or ethnicity, but it's those who tend to fall in this socioeconomic status, or those who tend to fall into maybe your migrant workers, your families are migrant workers, your English as a second language is an identifier for you. So that may be how the funding goes, if that's what that question is. And then two, also understanding that that money is given based on the fact that these scholars right here may need extra support. The whole idea of equity comes into play. These students need more to get to the level playing field of the students who may have this baseline education. And so that's where I see that. When I see that question, and I can definitely be corrected, but from my experience, it's been more of the at-risk factors that you may see some of the additional funding to try and level the playing field. And that's still a fight. There's still a fight there. That's politicized. That gets politicized. In Kansas, we've had several court cases in the state, and our legislators hated the fact that the Supreme Court of Kansas had to overturn some things. There was a study that was done years ago. I was learning this during my doctoral studies, where the conservative wing had some individuals to come in and kind of do an assessment of the schooling, of school funding. They were still funding schools at 1997 rates, and we were in 2008 at the time. And so when they found the findings came out, they thought they were doing something. They had this commission that was going to say they were doing well. They actually did the opposite and said that they needed to fund more, put more into the schools, and the legislators didn't like that. Especially all of our schools across the state, and especially you can imagine in our urban areas, we were dealing with a lack.
Now, I think this question, Dr. Pickett, we know that you've had some experience with working in the legislative level for state advocacy and education. So, want to talk a little bit about that process, and anyone else can chime in.
Yeah, so I've had to do it on a couple of levels. And one of the things that, again, I think I kind of mentioned earlier, of course, I always lobbied those who were on the education committee. Obviously, you want to start there. You want to make sure you're continuously going to their meetings and being, and kind of knowing what the key thing is. But one of the things I had to learn, and it's not, and I think Dr. Jones just clearly just spoke about it. It's the politics side of it. You have to learn who are the power players. At the end of the day, when you're lobbying, you're trying to. I understand that you can be as democratic as you can, and all you want, and you can be as Republican as you can. But if whoever's in power is the one that holds the purse strings, you need to be able to have the discussions accordingly to be able to get them engaged in what you want, and you have to speak a language that's going to resonate with them. And so, as much, I'm not saying sell your soul, but I am saying that you have to know the words, you have to know the conversation, you have to know what it needs to be said to make sure that your stuff is being funded. And you can't go in there at, so radical that they won't listen. And so there are times where you have to know who to send, you have to know what to say, you have to know and play them at their own game. You have to be able to, and then of course, follow. the other thing you have to do is follow where the money goes. And people, you know, I've learned here again the enticement of the enticement of the funds that are here. We realize that there are people who the backdoor conversations being had. Don't waste your time on those who are just not going to say yes. I think a lot of times we go to and then don't always assume that your people have your best interest at heart either. So you can't always assume that when you go to the door, you're thinking people who look like you going to fight, because a lot of them have motives too. So you have to pay attention to people's voting records, pay attention to how people vote, pay attention how people are doing things. That's what helped get your things along. And sometimes, again, you have to be able to play the game. You have to be able to answer certain questions and be able to talk to certain talk in order to get what you need. I've learned that is how a lot of things get through. And that's how you effectively kind of get some things done. But there are some people who do things some other ways. I just know that I have seen in my practice, that's how it functionally works, and that's how you get the money you need to get.
You know, Dr. Pearson, I'm going to come to you with a question, because you led a school district through a very difficult period, right? Yes. And we saw where the state had taken accreditation, and it was not just that school district, but it was other school districts, right? And we saw a lot of redistricting. We saw a lot of combining of districts, because I think another district might have closed. So, you know, that was a very difficult period for you to take the leadership and to guide them through. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and you know, some of the strategies that you had to incorporate in order to help get through this period?
Sure. I assumed the seat mid-year, and then I served for 5.5 years. It's interesting. The first thing that you have to get clear about is what are the internal challenges, and so you begin by doing that needs assessment of every single system in the organization. I mean, not just the instruction. You want to take a look at what's going on with the finances. You want to take a look at what's going on with facilities. You want to take a look at hiring practices. You want to take a look at all those kind of things. You do a needs assessment. You have to then do that and then identify what it is the state is telling you must do in order for you to, again, begin to move back going in this right direction. You have to create some relationships. Now, the fortunate thing I had is I came out of retirement to do my work. So when I retired, I had colleagues in lots of spaces. And so many of those individuals were willing to work with us as we began to redesign the system that we wanted to have happen. That was really critical, because if they're not people willing to work with you, even on the political end, you're going to have some serious challenges. So I was fortunate enough to have that. But what was intriguing for me is, very candidly, I come out of retirement and I'm in front of the state board, in front of the state, and in front of legislators about every 3 months in some capacity. And so just as what was said earlier, you have to begin to get really clear about what your goal is and what you need to do. So you do your needs assessment, you realign resources, you redo your goals, rewrite a whole new comprehensive plan, and then you begin to share that information over and over again with the community. I bring that up because, frankly, the Normandy community was traumatized. I thought that people were just angry with the state coming in and taking over. But my second year, when I saw teachers break down in front of me crying as they talked about what happened when the state took over, everybody's jobs ended, all contracts ended, and then they had to rehire everyone back. And they rehired 52%, they rehired 52%. So 48% of the organization was all new. So you're rebuilding a culture, you're helping them get focused, you're pouring into people, you're raising their sense of efficacy to help them believe that it can be done at the same time that you're trying to provide them solid training so they had a capacity to do it. There were the partnerships, working with community, working with the state, working with a powerful board. All of those things have to be happening at the same time. And you ask, how do you do it? You have to do it with a high level of integrity. You got to have your moral purpose really clear. You have to be able to look people in the eye and say, we're improving the lives of Black children. You have to look at children and say to them, people are saying you have no capacity. People are saying that you can't do it. I'm telling you, the adults in this space are telling you that you can do it, and then creating the support so they can do it. It takes all of that and constant monitoring. You monitor every single change that you put in place. You monitor on a regular basis. You report to your board every month on every single change that's taking place. And if something isn't working, you have to do the deep study and be able to pivot. But you also don't pivot so quickly. You got to be sure you're doing it right and it's not working before you make a change. Because you can be doing something wrong and it's not working, and you change programs, it still won't be a difference. So all of that, the culture has to get changed first. The programming has to get changed second. Accountability in a positive sense has to be done third, and then just monitor, and keep everybody informed. And gradually the community begins to feel we can do this, and children begin to feel we can do this. Because when people have been traumatized and they've been told that they have no value. For us, when Michael Brown was killed as a graduate of Normandy, the whole nation said that's why he died. Because he came from a school system like that. And all of those children are just like that. And then so you're dealing with helping people go, no, his was one story, but there are 3,500 other stories, and we still have children getting scholarships. We still have children doing amazing things. And yet you have to just constantly keep saying that, and constantly keep monitoring, and constantly keep training people. Yeah. So I only got about 200 PowerPoints that I can support that with, but we don't have that kind of time. But trying to get all that into a few minutes, that's the bottom line. Strategic thinking, strategic action, realigning resources, partnerships, and being as candid and as transparent as you can. Even when the news is bad, you stand in front of people and say, this is what we thought would happen, and it didn't happen. And you never lie. Never.
And Dr. Payne, you've turned a school around that and made it a model school for early childhood. So how did your strategies, how were they alike, and how did they differ, from when we're looking at Dr. Pearson and he's looking at a district, but we know success begins one school at a time, right? And we have to focus in. So talk to us a little bit about your struggles and strategies and things of that nature.
Yeah, so when I took over as the early childhood director for Riverview, it was back in 2017, I think. They were in terms, it was more so with the staffing, because the lost people, not it was 6 teachers that immediately left, because to be quite honest, it was 6 white women that said, I'm definitely okay with that, because I didn't need you in front of my Black and brown kids. So it was a staffing issue. I basically, went in before.
Dr. Payne, I think you're having some internet challenges right now because you're in and out. So we're going to come back to you on that question. You're probably still talking, but I think your internet is challenging. So we'll come back before we end the night and come back to that conversation. Earlier, there was a mention about really looking at the social emotional needs of the students, right? And how important that is, right? So when we're talking about social emotional needs and those restorative practices teachers can implement to deactivate the classroom prison thought. So somebody talk a little bit with us, share a little bit about your thoughts on this particular topic, because it's critical. And I believe that parents, teachers, the community really need to understand how impactful that social emotional part is.
Well,
I told you we were going to get deep tonight, a little deeper than last time.
What's interesting is that right now, social emotional learning is getting attacked by some politicians in many spaces and lumping it all into a critical race theory, which is like way just politically expedient, but wrong. Trauma 101. you imagine if you're, and this is how it was taught us, you're in the woods and a bear is chasing you. Your brain triggers and you either do flight, you run, you freeze out of fear, or you fight. And then what the teacher said to us, imagine if you're living with the bear every day. The brain now is constantly in that space. The brain now is, so a child who is homeless, a child who has got an incarcerated parent, a child who has just experienced violence the night before, walks into school with all of those challenges. And if they're living in that day after day, the teacher has to be trained on how to talk to the child, work with the child so that the teacher themselves doesn't become a trigger. So you have to train teachers how to do that, because that's not part of our methods classes. It's just not. You have to train. And then here's what's interesting, Dr. Saint. When I led our first leadership team through that, my principals recognized they had some triggers that they had no idea about. One of my assistant principals had lost a brother to gun violence. And so when children came to school with the RIP on the shirt, something was happening in him that he hadn't really dealt with. So now he was conscious of it. And now he began to think about how he responded. And then you have to go and train all your teachers on how to do those things too, because if you don't, a teacher can be inadvertently triggering a child and not be aware of it. If the child was being yelled and screamed at home, and then a teacher is raising their voice in them in the classroom, that child goes into the fight, flight, or freeze mode. They just do. So this whole idea of training adults to do these kind of things, be sensitive to it, to recognize what's happening in front of children, in front of them with children, that's the essence of the social emotional learning. You know your own triggers. You listen to children, you pay attention to children, you find out what resources they need, and those are like those very first steps. But it's challenging work. One workshop does not do it.
And so then now you're starting to bring the sociologist out of me, because this is kind of where I have to help our instructors and people in our school in general. Because when we start talking about this concept around restorative justice, there are the restorative justice and restorative practices. There is what people have to be mindful is when you look at restorative practices, you cannot talk about restorative practice without talking about restorative justice and the practice around it. And so there are 3 levels or 3 areas that you have to look at when you're doing restorative practice. There's 3 people, there's 3 entities involved. You have the victim or the person who it is. That's their, that victim's reparation. Then you have what we have, the person who's the offender or that person's responsibility of it. And then you actually have the community discussion or the community reconciliation around it. So you first have to understand how to speak to the victim or the person who was offended, and then you have to be able to speak to the offender and get them to understand they were the offender. And then you have to be able to come together and determine how do you bring together both to find a level of reconciliation that both individuals realize they're both being supported. And that takes a lot. So it takes more than just, as Dr. Pearson was saying, it takes more than just a seminar. You also need to have people in your building who are actual professionals who can actually have those discussions. So it can't, I think sometimes we put too much on teachers to do, so you're asking them to be, and I understand that, it's a part of, but they can't be the teacher and expect them to be able to do the main thing they're doing, which is to make sure that child is effectively able to go to the next grade. And so being able to say, I need you to be, the teacher and the referee, that's a hard thing to do. And so I think we have to still be able to find those spaces to where we provide professionals in those spaces to help those teachers out and not say, teacher, you got to be, you got to be the this, that, and the this and that you can't. So it's a hard dynamic. It's almost like saying you're telling them to be the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. That's a hard thing to kind of do sometimes. So it's like I need you to be one of the 3 and perfect that for what's needed at that time in order to do that. But again, it's a hard thing to do especially when you're creating, I hate to say this, but when you're creating this environment where teachers can't say much to students anymore, or teachers can't do much anymore, because they'll be caught up on TikTok, or they'll be caught on social media, and then next thing you know, they're possibly fired because they did this or did that. And so the system is stripping, I hate to say this, but the system is stripping educators from being educators. But then when they go beyond that aspect, then they're not doing their job. And so it's one of those hard dynamics where you have to allow the teacher to be the teacher and provide them the resources to still let them teach.
Yeah.
Resources is huge. And I've one of our schools, actually my alma mater, they implemented, after having some years of chaos, restorative practices. And what it took was, it took resources. It took having several people, several social workers coming in and working with that buildings, psychologists coming in and working with the scholars, so that those who know and who are the experts could come in and assist with that. But school systems have to commit the funding and the resources to make it happen. And then two, I think Dr. Pickett makes a great point, that you're bringing people who have their own view of the world and their own view of how things should be done. I had some teachers that wanted to get a pound of flesh because this kid said this and said that, and I need to just get them. Well, I just had a conversation with the scholar. I found out all these other things are going on. Yep, they definitely are going to, they have some consequences. But if we can get them to move on and get them to buy into what it is that we're doing, because we're showing that we care and that we're not so concerned about you simply serving this detention because it's what I want, it's what I have as the rule in my class, and this is what has to happen. Let's really figure out what we want most. I had one person where she was so angry that we had even talked to the kid, and we helped the kid improve upon how they responded to things. We got the kid to say, hey, you know what? I'm sorry. And when that person found out that we had spoken with the student, they were upset because they felt like now the child was saying, I'm sorry because you all told them to. Well, hey, that's a step, because before you came in this office, they were cussing you out up and down the street. And I had to tell them, no, we're not going to do that. That's the way you may talk at home, but this is how we address people, even in times of anger and frustration. So I say that because everybody's not ready for it. Everybody's not capable of it. Everybody's not mature. But I believe the practices, I believe that idea of restoring them. Because one thing I would tell teachers, sometimes they would say, get them out of my room because they're frustrated. Hey, kids messed up the whole spirit of the classroom. The flow is messed up. And now this teacher who's planned this beautiful lesson, they have a struggle with it. Now they have a personal problem. I used to always say, I don't hold grudges against kids. If I did, I'd be mad at the whole class at some point in time. So you have to be able to move on. But you also have to understand that just simply sending you out and away from this space does not mean that the child will never come back. I have to restore them back to the space. And there are some things that you all need to work out. Don't give me the power to make the decisions. I need you to also restore it. I'm going to support you, but I need you to also be a partner in this game. But it's something that's not, as Dr. Pearson said, we don't have this in our methods courses. We don't teach those things. Our institutions are teaching to the majority. And where do we have a lot of these problems? A lot of these problems we see in our urban centers and our urban school districts. And so it's definitely an area that has become very popular. More and more people are seeing the need for it. But we have to make sure the resources are committed to it, and that it's something that goes beyond a fad. Because let me tell you, we're going to need this in our schools from here on out.
And I always tell people, honestly, restorative practices was really stolen from early childhood. And I mean that in a good way, because the history of early childhood and just children in general, they do restorative practices, honestly, themselves, because younger kids are able to quickly tell you, like, how they feel, how you made them feel when they did that, am I ready to be your friend again? And basically, that's what restorative practices is. And when I was early childhood director, Riverview, I was fortunate that the district really allowed me to utilize restorative practices because where a lot of schools go wrong, they'll implement it year one and then they'll take this train the train model and you're already going to fail because they don't want to take the time to dedicate that type of funding to it. But when you do, it really does work because we saw immediate gains with it. Like the teachers really were on board with like the community circles. The students really got on board quick, and I'm always big on making sure my families understand what we're doing in our center. So I made sure that the families were a part of every PD that we had when it came to restorative practices, because we had one every month. The parents were allowed too, because I wanted the parents to understand, like when your child is coming home telling you, well, hey, mom, I want to talk about this, or can we can we do a family circle? I need you to understand the language and what they're and what they're asking. So I wanted the families to see how, like how we run our community circles, how we run our restorative meetings when two students have an issue, because naturally, sometimes, little Ray Ray is just going to get on your nerves and you do want him out of your classroom, or little Ray Ray may run around and beat up everybody. And, the kid is removed 10, 20 minutes later, little Ray Ray is back in the classroom. But what we quickly saw, like with the restorative practices, little Ray Ray come talk to Dr. Payne. I'm asking him what's going on. Like, how are you feeling in that moment? How do you think your friends were feeling at that moment? And then we go back to the classroom. We restore the classroom. The students are able to let little Ray Ray know how they feel when he acts like that, and the teacher. And then we ask, "Are you ready to receive him?" And most of the times the kid would say, "Yeah." But if the kids would say, "Well, no, we're not ready for him to come back to the classroom," I'll be like, "Okay, well, we're going to talk about this some more." But unfortunately, little Ray Ray does have to come back. But the kids understood like what they were doing. So anytime, like if I had to move a kid to teacher B classroom, the environment was the same because we were using that universal language, and the kids, really understood it. And so it really did, like work. But unfortunately, a lot of schools are catching on to it now, and they're doing like the part one of it, but they never get to the part two and the part three. And then that's why it really goes down on the wayside. Because if you ask any school, whether it's a early childhood center to high school that's doing really well with restorative practices, they'll tell you because it took about 5 years to get there, because it really does take about 5 years before it, becomes like a well-oiled machine. But you can only do that if you put the money behind it.
So, Dr. Saint, could I, as a member of the panel, could I ask a quick question?
You sure can. You all
And
are
actually, I
welcome.
just want to pivot back because Dr. Payne started, and I think Dr. Pickett could help. How do you bring parents along in the idea of accepting restorative practices? I mean, we had meetings. You got parents in a space, and their child has been bullied or this or that, and they want a pound of flesh, So helping them understand what this means and how we work together, why we're doing it this way, as opposed to giving the child 10 days out. Talk about that a little bit, because my sense is you've done a bit of that work. I'd like to hear that. And I think maybe others would too.
It's a good question.
Well, my biggest issue was, like I would hear from families all the time, well, my child don't have feelings. Like your feelings, and they didn't want their child to, be like, okay, well, mom, when you yell at me, this is how it makes me feel. Mm-hmm. Traditionally in the Black household, my Black parents was like, I don't care about his feelings. I don't want to know how he feel. He know what he did was wrong. It is what it is. And so I would always bring my difficult families, and not difficult in a bad way, just those who had a hard time seeing it. Whenever schedule permitted for them, I would have them to come observe, a circle, so they can really see what the back and forth looks like, with the adults. Because I would always tell them, you want your child to be able to have these type of conversations with you now, so when they get older, they won't feel embarrassed or go to other people to truly tell you what's going on or how they feel, because they're too afraid to have those type of conversations, with you. And I would just have to let my parents actually see that in action sometimes, because what I found out, they didn't necessarily, it wasn't that they didn't have, they had a big problem with it. It was that they didn't necessarily have the language to use with their child, and didn't know how to have those type of conversations with their child, or even what type of questions to ask. So once they started, like seeing that, like they quickly got on board. But in my situation, I just had it was split. It was like a lot of parents were, like they were immediately on board and was open to it. And then the rest was like, some bought into it afterwards. And then, you still had some that were on the fence because they just truly believe they didn't want to have that type of conversation with their child, because it's like, you're a child, you're going to stay in the child's place. And that's one of the biggest hurdles that I still deal with families, is letting them know that, you can have healthy conversations with your child like this, and it's not stripping your rights or power as a mom or as a dad. It's not making you look lesser than your child. It's simply communication. But a lot of our families don't know how to have those type of conversations with their child.
So a lot of time it's cultural. It's our cultural conditioning, right? And so do as I say and not as I do, that prohibit us from being able to really engage in those healthy conversations with our kids, and I was one of those parents, right? So you kind of run your home like an authoritarian, and I mean, worked in the prison system, so I knew how to, lock a house down, like, so, and that becomes a challenge when we don't know, right? But that education piece, Dr. Pickett, it looked like you're thinking there, man.
Well, no, because it's slightly around, because it's everything that was just said. But this particular comment is interesting to me because, this is something we see so much in Black households, but it's what we also have to understand is our parents, even though you believe that restorative circles may empower children to make adult decisions, we force our children to make adult decisions every day. How do I say that? When we make statements like, you don't have real problems, when you have bills to pay, when you have this, and this, then you got problems with everything else. Well, first of all, they're 10 or they're 5. They shouldn't have to have bills to pay. That's not their responsibility. That's not their role. And so you're perpetuating in their mind that until you get these kinds of situations or these entities, that you don't have real problems or you don't have real issues. You tell them until you have an adult issue or a problem. Hence the reason why you see a lot of these children, you see a lot of increased suicide rates and things of that nature, because of the fact that you're expressing to these children that they don't have issues. When children speak, they're telling you something and they're expressing something. And a lot of times we've conditioned and we've trained ourselves and our community to, I hate to say this, and a lot of people get mad about this statement, we've trained people to believe this concept of what goes on in my house stays in my house. But my question is, what happens when the thing in the house is hurting me? And the thing in my house is the thing I'm trying to run from. But yet we don't train children to speak up for themselves, because now I'm putting our business on blast or I'm putting our stuff in the street, but I'm asking for help. And so the best way that we can do, I've had to revert my parents back. This is how this situation affects your child. I have to put it on at the end of the day. This is how this situation affects your child. When your child is not in school, your child is missing this much, and this much. When you're keeping them out for this, they're missing this much, and this much. You have to literally put the onus back on them and realize when you make decisions and when you decide for your child, these issues, that's what this affects your child in this way. And as was being said, children know what hurts them. Children understands what's bothering them. You have to listen to them. Stop making it seem like they don't, what they're saying doesn't make sense. Then you wonder why you got these kids doing these TikTok videos. You got to understand why you have these kids reaching out for social media or expressing through social media, because of the fact that they don't have another outlet. Because again, our parents have been, especially our newer age parents, have been conditioned to believe that, stay in a child's place and that's where it is. And that's just not. And I hate to say that some people aren't ready to handle ownership, but you were ready to have that child. So we have to force again, that's you. You had the child. So you want to take some ownership of the thing that you produced and be mindful that you can't expect everybody else to take ownership of something that you produced if you're not going to take ownership of it too.
Can I interject? I mean, that was pretty heavy.
Yes,
I can't remember which person it was, and it was at a conference where Robert Ingersoll was there, who's done a lot of research on staffing schools. And but I remember at that conference someone stating the difference in our scholars, and this was around the time I think when Common Core was coming around, and they were talking about the way students learn, and they were comparing students from Japan doing a certain problem and the way their curriculum was written compared to the way we write our curriculums and how many standards and things like that. And one of the things that it got down to was this idea of students problem solving, students taking risk. I think this goes into play into some of the reasons why I believe our scholars are the lowest performing, quote unquote, when you look at your standardized assessments, because hey, we were raised, do as I say. I don't need you to ask questions why. And we used to probably laugh. I know I did. I used to tell my kids, hey, you're not the Brady Bunch. So, don't, even though they had no concept of the Brady Bunch, we don't throw doors, we don't close doors, we don't ask too many questions. You do what I told you to do. But then I realized that, what? They don't think. If all I do is tell them to think how I want them to think, they don't get a chance to share with me what they're thinking. And so I became that parent. I changed pretty quickly. And I said, I want to know if they ask me why, I want to tell them why. Now, take the baritone out your voice when you're asking that. And actually, you all told that, I'm sure. And so, and I think that's the reason why I became a baritone, because I wanted to get some baritone in my voice when I got grown. But nevertheless, I felt like it was necessary for me to give my own children and even give my scholars the full picture, whenever I could, to give them the full picture about why it is that I'm doing what I'm doing. This is why I'm asking, because we used to make fun of kids who would say, but why, Mom? And we're like, oh my goodness, if we said that to our mamas, they would have slapped us in the mouth. We wouldn't have the teeth that we have. But researchers have found those kids who do ask those questions, those parents who do allow their students to explore a bit more, they're willing to take some risk. And sometimes our scholars don't take risks. They don't think outside because of the fear. And then there are those who want to keep students at that level. They want to keep them subjected because that is the power, that is the control that they have. And I want to make sure you don't have as much as I have. And so this is how much I'm going to limit you. And so we see just so many different dynamics happening. You have our scholars that end up being in trouble because they can't express themselves. They won't express themselves. They see how you respond to this kid. This kid does it, but then when it's me that does it, then I need to go down to the principal's office. And so those are some things that we can do within the community. We can control what goes on in our community by educating each other, by making ourselves present, by saying, hey, you know what, demand this. Hey, allow this. Look at this. Have these healthy dialogues. We have to take time to speak with our children. Sit down at the dinner table. If you don't have time to sit at the dinner table, find some space, because you work in multiple jobs. Go find some space and some time to get a feel for what your children are needing, and to allow them to ask those questions so that they become those better thinkers. But it should start early on. And I think that we can change a lot of things if we are intentional about the way in which we raise our children, about the way we expose them, and how much we want to really pull out of them.
T-Bird, I think you had a question.
I had a couple of questions, but I just like the flow, so I don't want to pivot too much. I'm just really soaking it all in at this point. So I don't have to throw my question out right now.
Okay, and of course I'm talking to our producers. We're gonna go just a little bit over our normal because we want to finish up this conversation today, and it's been rich. And we see a lot of individuals that's joining in, so our producers are listening in. We're gonna take this just a little bit longer than what we normally do. One of the things that, and when I was talking to someone about the conversation we were going to have tonight, it was the idea of removing the parents' voice in the school. Right. And so we have somewhat parent participation when we have those first, kindergarten through third or fourth grade, but then gradually there's this removing of the parents, and almost as if, and we see it now in higher education where parents got to get what the students actually have to sign to allow the parents to get permission to even see grades and things like that. But we start to see that around that 6th, 7th grade, and then in full blast in high school. Right. So, let's talk about that a little bit, and the impact of that, as well as, how do we change this?
We have to stop, first of all, thinking that the kids at that age, that they're the adults and that they make the decisions. Sometimes individuals in early education, early childhood education, in elementary school, you see families show up to events. You see them supporting, you see them asking, they're coming to parent-teacher conferences. In many cases, then all of a sudden, you're right, middle school, you see a drop-off. In high school, you see a major drop-off. And so it's a matter of, this right here is actually the time that continues to be critical. I don't know of a time in K-12 where it's not a critical moment for each scholar. And so that hands-off approach, and me depending on my student to give me the information is definitely the wrong way. Because some people say, well, those parents work. Well, those are the same parents that were showing up in kindergarten, in 2nd grade and 3rd grade. And so what gives now? Just the mindset that we don't need them. We need that voice because now the students are getting ready to make decisions about careers, about college, post-high school. So, I've seen it, lived it, especially in your urban schools. We see it even more pronounced. And then 2, are we really inviting parent voice?
Mm-hmm.
Are we really inviting parent voice of our urban students, of our African-American, our brown, our Latino parents? Do we really want to hear that? Because I see them say in some cases, hey, parents aren't here, but then we talk when they do come in, hey, what do they know? So I've seen and heard that around the water cooler, and it's which of the dynamics do we want?
There has to be some real intentionality around all of this. As was already stated, there's a natural thing, and it's actually American culture, that the older our children get, the more we let them go. Now, I did some study on West African West African life for a period of time, and what they recognized years ago, at least, the older the child got, the more temptations there were, so the closer they had to hold them. That's not necessarily how America, period, Western culture treats children. So there has to be that thought process. Secondly, is school structures. Making parents welcome. There's a natural affinity for those parents to still be very involved, say up to 5th or 6th grade. It falls off in middle school. Sometimes it falls off because the parents go there older. Sometimes it falls off because this is when the child starts saying, what'd you do at school? They say nothing, and the parent doesn't pursue. So this idea of their strategies, the teacher who calls every parent the week before school starts, that's a connection builder. The teacher who regularly sends home information before the first parent conferences or the 1st grade card. There has to be a continuum of conversation going on. You don't see those as isolated incidents. Phone call before school, checkup midway, progress report, quarter grade. That should be seen as one long continuum. Then you fold into that strategies like teacher home visits. I did some work for 3 years with Homeworks where you train teachers how to do a home visit, 2 visits a year. The first visit is just tell me about your child. What are your dreams for your child? We're not even going to discuss that. What are your dreams? What are your hopes? What is it you want me to know about your child this year that I may not know by looking at them? Then you're still communicating. And then the second visit, let's talk about the academics. What's working? What's the strengths? And there was a great model. I think it was called parent-teacher teams, PTTs. You invite parents in. This is the unit we're going to be studying next. Do some hands-on with them. So they understand the unit that's coming up. And then when they're at home, they're not so in the dark about what they're seeing. And then that parent also knows if they have a question, they can call the teacher. But there's a long, continuous process that begins before the school year starts, and it has to continue all the way through. So it's all of it is intentionality, but they're just specific strategies. And it's not just to teach schools shutting them out. I agree with Dr. Jones. Schools do need to be welcoming, but the relationship ought to already have started before they cross the threshold. That's good. Yeah.
And the unfortunate situation is, there are processes that are setting parents up to be pushed out, right? Like when you think about K-5, I don't know how the kind of works here, but like for instance, a lot of schools here, K-5, schools require your parents to sign your child's agenda, so they see what's going on in the school each day. As they start moving to middle school, you start hearing that, well, you're now on your own. We're trying to wean you off of being parent dependent. So they stop making you have to do such things less than that. So they try to find ways to make you more independent and less dependent. Then when you get to high school, there's really no checks and balances, because at this point they're feeling like we're trying to prep you for college, not realizing that when we're trying to prep you for college, you still need parent engagement involvement. And so the way our system, unfortunately, is set up, it's to gradually phase out the parent. But then again, we ask the parent to come fix the problem, but we're phasing them out. And so we don't provide those spaces where we don't even force parents to come, do parent conferences anymore. We still pass kids on without doing parent conferences. I'm not gonna lie to you. When I was an administrator, I made it very clear that one of the requirements for your child moving on to the next grade level is that you had to have met some requirements of, we had to meet the parents a certain amount of times throughout that year, because I'm not passing your child on if you don't know what's going on in this institution. That was, and we made arrangements. We know there are parents who work, and we made arrangements. We would do video calls, or we came and did it at your house, or but we wanted to ensure that you were involved in that process. And so it becomes that we as a system have to be very careful that we're not creating policies that forces the parent out. But then, as Dr. Jones was saying, you also have to stop making the parents feel like just because you're not at this level, or you don't have any there's no validity, or there's no value in what you bring. We don't utilize our PTOs anymore. We don't utilize our PTAs. We don't even require that to even be a thing anymore, or we don't even provide that space. I hate to say this right now, but one of my schools don't have it. And that's going to change, because that's one voice, one space where parents can have engagement, have involvement. And so it's just that we have to do a better job from a policy perspective and what we push to not begin to alienate those parents, because if we stop providing those spaces, parents, I hate to say this, but parents aren't going to they're not going to just take it upon themselves. We have to continue to provide those spaces for those parents. But again, we're setting them up for failure when we start stripping them away and making it feel like they're less needed as they go up the cycle.
Those are some great thoughts and comments, especially the strategies that you're talking about, because those things are critical when we're talking about parental involvement. So I want to shift as we go into the last section of our conversation today. And I want to talk about the impact of having a Black male presence in an urban school, right? Because many times we go in our suburban schools, or, primarily white schools, and you see the presence of men, right? You see them in principal roles, you see them in the classrooms, you see that. My kids went to a school that was primarily white in St. Louis area. And from early part, most of the leadership were white men. And then throughout, you saw at least one man, seemed like in every grade level, right? But in our schools, when we go into our urban schools, many times we see, and thank God for our women, right? But we don't see the presence of a Black male educator. So what's the impact that you believe that having more Black men in our schools, what does that give us?
I think for me, though, it's great to have Black men in the schools. you just don't. But make sure they're in impactful spaces in the school.
Mhm.
I don't believe in just putting a black man in the school and then immediately they go into, because again, I didn't get a black male educator until I was like 11th grade.
Mhm.
But when I became an educator, I was viewed though as the disciplinarian. And that was the immediate reaction to, oh, we got a black man, it's gonna be a disciplinarian, he gonna show. That bothered me because in many cultures, we're not always deemed to, yes, be a disciplinarian, but we can also be a nurturer.
Yes.
And you have to be able to nurture and cultivate too. Don't just put me as the disciplinarian, because again, then you start putting the fear, so that fear factor starts coming in. So I think for me, it's good to see black men in the middle, but you have to strategically place them in a place where they're not always deemed as a disciplinarian or deemed as something else, because you may have, especially if you have young black men who don't have fathers or black male figures in their lives, they're immediately going into a defensive mode because like, how are you going to tell me? And because they're conditioned to believe I don't got no man in my life. And especially if they have women who always talking down about black men, all they think is a black man and ain't no good. And so if they see disciplinarian, you can't discipline me because I'm conditioned to believe that you ain't no good. So it's again positioning strong black men. The institutions where I sit over right now, we have I will say, I think we're at 60% of our staff are black men.
Wow.
And 60% of our staff are black men. Not heard of in our area, and we pride ourselves on that. But again, we're also very intentional that they're not always the disciplinarians. They are in all fields. They're not just our gym teachers, and nothing against our gym teachers, but they're not just our gym teachers. They're our chemistry teachers. They are our math teachers. They're our they're not just the coach, but they also do other aspects in the building, which I think goes back to what we talked about really quickly last week, or the last time we were here, about how we encourage and educate, how we encourage people to want to go into education, put them in a better light. Put them in positions and encourage them to go into these fields that will want kids to want to become that. And I think that would then begin to speak volume. Put black men in influential spaces that will encourage people, one, to do it, and encourage young people to want to say, listen, I'm connected to you and I feel that. And I've seen that work with us as we continue to, do that.
So I appreciate the question, but and then I saw in the comments, and I think this is really true too. I began my career in Norman. I taught for 5 years, left become an entrepreneur for 3, then came back and taught 4. Then I went to another school district, very affluent school district. I mean, just one of the best in the nation, et cetera, et cetera. And what I found was that I ended up having the same conversations with students, black students, and all students in that space that as I did in Normandy. And a really thing I found out is one of a few black teachers there, I noticed, and this is intriguing to me, the first few weeks, the black girl students wouldn't talk to me. And I was curious about that. But then I realized they don't know me. We have no idea what experiences they've had. So I've been there for a while. And this one girl came and talked to me about kind of a personal issue, and I just talked to her and shared with her. The next day, 7, 8 more girls were waving and saying hello to me in the hall because the word began to spread. He's authentic, he'll listen, he cares. Then all of a sudden, I was okay. But I recognized that just by my being there in that role, it was good for them, same conversations, but for all the white children who were there, who only saw black people as their maids, as the custodian, as their groundskeepers, all of a sudden, there were 4 or 5 other black males there, all of us radically different kind of men too. One spoke 7 languages, the other one was a genius in mathematics. So we all were different. They had a chance to see all of us, and we dispelled a lot of stereotypes. So wherever we are, that role, my best friend was a principal in the middle of city schools. Bow tie every day, suit every day. Why do you dress like that? He said to them, I'm a professional. They said to him, we heard that. Those kinds of models across the board valuable. Wherever we are in a space, those are the messages we're communicating. We just have to be sure we're authentic. You don't have to fake it. Just be you.
Hey, amen to that. I noticed that when I had my first opportunity to serve as a principal at the elementary school. The kids sometimes wondered, they saw you come in with your shiny shoes, your suited and booted. They were taking note of what you do,
Yes.
But it's not so much even just about your appearance. I believe, as someone had put in the comments, that every student could benefit from an African-American male educator. We bring something there. We bring a sense of presence. Yes, we have been known as the ones that everybody wants us to do the discipline, and they look at and say the kids are not going to cross that person. I've seen some weak ones though, also who I wouldn't trust spending 5 kids in the room with, because they're not going to bring that benefit or they're not going to bring that presence. But I believe wholeheartedly, with all the things that have been said, is that we can make a difference. We can make an impact. We can show scholars that you can live off being an educator. You can carve your own path. I was able to do that, and I believe that I influenced some individuals, some young people, to see that yes, you can have a family. You can do, I guess, the role of an educator and still be someone who feels like you've been accomplished, that you've accomplished something. It's amazing. It's interesting you said about the young ladies. I remember Samantha. She was one of my first students. And Samantha reminded me of my youngest sister. She had a little fast mouth. She was talking. She was quick. She knew how to roll her eyes. I knew how to roll my eyes right back to her. But Samantha was one of those kids. She wasn't going to fight first, but if you threw the blow, she was going to clean it up. And what I found during parent-teacher conferences, she started calling me Uncle JJ. And I said, I don't know about this Uncle JJ stuff. I don't like that. It just said Jamie at the time was the only one calling me Uncle JJ. I just don't think this is right. And her mom said, no, Mr. Jones, let her call you that. She said, you're the first African-American, you're the first male, period, that she has ever trusted. And I said, wow. She said her father's in jail, her uncles are in jail. She has other relatives that have been killed. And she said, you're the first guy that she's ever come home and talked about. Yeah. And so I realized early on in my career that the kids are watching, the students are watching what I do. Because number one, it wasn't that many of me, wasn't that many African-American males in the building teaching, or that was in a certified role. But I knew that I had a responsibility, and I had a responsibility to show them that we are more than what is projected in media. We're more than the stereotype. And we can, if we come in and do it right, we can totally make a difference. We can change the culture of a school. I've seen it happen with band directors in our school district who come in and command. They come from the HBCU style or regiment of marching. And so they come in with the demands. Those same kids that may give struggles to other teachers, when they come into that room, they understand that this is what's expected and I can't do any less. So we have, and then too, we can also say things that other people can't say. I can have conversations with students that other people can't have those conversations with. Keep it 100, keep it real. I haven't said anything disrespectful, but I'm just telling you like it is because of the perspective and the experience that I have.
No, this has been a great 2-part conversation. And so I know that No More Hiding Manhood Moments are very grateful for you all being with us and joining us at this table. And I'm sure that we're going to have individuals, because this is probably one of the most viewed. The first one was probably one of the most viewed podcast episodes that we've had. And we expect the same with the next one, because right now, our education systems really need these voices. We need these strategic conversations from a Black male point of view, and being able to really make sure that our voices are heard. Right. And so as we get ready to close this down, we always do final thoughts, right, around the room. And we ask our speakers for final thoughts. So we're going to start with Dr. Payne. Dr. Payne, give us that final thought, that word of wisdom, and share with the people from your perspective.
What was the last part? Share my perspective.
Just share your perspective on education and how we can really have an impact.
Got you. For me right now, the state of education, we're definitely in emergency 911 situation. But, like the good thing is, we have to continue to fight the good fight and show up every day because our black and brown babies, they really do need us. And, unfortunately, we're just currently in a field right now that's undervalued, and the respect is really leaving. But, we have to continue to show up and do what we're supposed to do so we can continue to educate and uplift and grow the generation that we're bringing up now, because in a few years, this will be the generation that will be taking care of us once we retire.
Man, that's awesome. Thank you, sir, for joining us, and we appreciate it. That's my fraternity brother there. And so, Dr. Pickett, we want to hear from you. Give us that final thought, word of wisdom.
I have been truly, first of all, blessed by this conversation. The thing that I've taken away and I've been learning and I've been realizing, especially as I've been quoting and telling people certain African proverbs. There's an African proverb that sticks so hard to me, which simply says, "To get lost is to learn the way." And one of the things that I think that we can be encouraged in is that as we are still traveling this journey, it's okay to mess up, make these mistakes. But I think for us, it's our responsibility and it's our job to keep making those mistakes to find that way. And I think that, I believe, is what's going to help us grow, because we're learning ourselves and we're learning where our struggles are. And so I think that in this season, I think it's the best place. As we continue to get lost, we learn our way in the process.
Dr. Pickett, once again, we really appreciate you joining us from down there in Georgia, man, giving us another perspective of this education system. And just as we shared with Dr. Payne, we appreciate everything that you brought to this conversation. Dr. Jones, what's going on, my brother? So talk to us a little bit, man. Give us that perspective and those words of wisdom.
Well, I don't know if I'm nearly as wise as these gentlemen here. I echo the sentiments that have been mentioned before me. I will say this, and this is the way that I view education. As long as there's someone who needs to be reached, our work is not done. I have to keep pursuing. I love that analogy, the proverb that was just spoken. We have individuals that need to be reached, and it's not somebody else's job. In fact, somebody else is not going to do it. We have to do it, and we have to empower others to want to do it. We have to grow and grow young people to become those who will now sit in our seats in a few years. But we have work to do. And there's no time as urgent as it is now, considering what we have dealt with the last 2 years, that we have to really keep pushing. So we have a lot of work to do. I'm still in the fight, and I encourage others to stay in the fight. And I encourage others to say, hey, you know what, if you haven't joined, come and join, because we have young minds that will change this world, and we want it to be changed for the good. So thank you so much for this space. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. When I met you at that conference, I knew then right away that we were going to continue that, because that connection, you could tell when you connect with somebody. And so just looking for that opportunity to really just bring in your voice. And you can also see the fruit of your labor through the work that your daughter was doing and the presentation she gave. And man, just continue to push up there in Kansas, and we hope to be able to support you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Dr. Pearson, sir, share with us those words of wisdom.
So there is the idea of starting with your why, of saying that you want to make a difference in the life of children. If that's a passion that is in anyone who is listening, then there are classrooms that can use you. They can use you whether you go into education. They can use you as a mentor. They can use you as a volunteer. But I really call this mission work. It's mission work. It's mission work. This is work from the heart. So I would say to those that are listening, this is an amazing time to get in. This whole system is actually changing. What a great time to become involved when the system is changing. And then the last thing I'd add candidly is for parents. It's been shown that there are certain things that happen in homes that make children become more successful. One of those things is that when you're home with children, talk to them positively about their future. Don't say to them, if you go to college or if you have your own business. Say when you have your own, when you go to college. Talk to them about getting an education, being of value for the family. And if you have a struggle, my last point with the school, let that be the adults working it out. Don't ever talk to children about what you don't like about the school. They should always be focused on getting there to get what they need. But work with the teachers there and the principals there to resolve differences so that collaboratively you can still serve children. That's all.
Man, that very impactful words. And thank you so much for joining us. One of our producers, as well as our co-producers and one of our teammates was like, we got to get Dr. Pearson in here. And you have been a blessing to this conversation and just how iron sharpens iron just among you four gentlemen and scholars. So we're thankful for you all being here. Dr. Pearson, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
T. Bird, what's going on, brother? This has been a great one. What's your thoughts? Share it with us.
Man, this is a fantastic conversation. I've enjoyed 3 hours plus of just the material you guys have, the wisdom you guys have imparted with us. My father was an educator for over 20 years, so some of the struggles you guys have, I've heard that from him. He was a disciplinarian, but he was also the nurturer, where some of the kids would call him dad because there were no dads around from diverse students where he was. And then I just see a parallel. I work in the criminal justice system, so I'm hearing you all stories and just hearing about the bear. I'm going to the house. I see the bear every time I'm there. So I can just imagine what the kids are when they come to the schools, because I'm going doing home visits. I'm talking kids down, trying to find out what their triggers are. So words I heard were intentional, mission walk. What we're all doing is important. And you guys are on a higher level, but you're able to give back to teach these teachers, be mentors to them so they can be mentors and teachers to the students in the same way that I am with my kids. And I just hope that some of our kids that in the criminal justice system are better able to get their GEDs. That's something that I see a disparity where some of the white kids, when they drop out of school, they're able to get their GED. It seems like our kids are always reading at a lower level, and it's harder for me to get them that next step to get their GED and go on. But I just want to say thank you all for spending your Thursdays with us the past 2 weeks. And I'm sure we could talk about have a third session, because I'm really curious about the virtual. Just hearing some of the frustration today about virtual for the past 2 days. I mean, my kids are doing virtual. They start from 8:30 and they're done at like 1:30. So I would just love to hear the changes too. But just thank you.
As always, and we remember 1/3 of our team, T. Patrick, who's in Seattle right now, and I'm sure he's listening in, and so we miss you at the table. But for those of you who joined us, these two conversations, we've learned a lot. But the one thing I think that we've learned, whether we're a teacher, whether we're an administrator, whether we're a parent, right, is that we have to be very intentional. We have to be very intentional about the lives of our students, about the lives of our children, about education in our communities. And these are very critical times right now, because the education has always been critical. It has always been important. But right now, right, we're starting to see such a separation. And if our students don't have those key resources, that they don't have that foundation of being able to learn, being able to critically think, things of that nature, then our community are going to be pushed farther and further behind. So if you're listening to this podcast and you just have questions, feel free to reach out to us. We will connect you with these educators, many of them doing consulting work. They're also available for public speaking and more enhanced conversations. So if you want them to be a part of your conversation, if you want them to come in and do a PD at your school, or you want them to be a part of your podcast or your webinar series, please reach out to us and we'll make their information available. And you can't get a better group of men to join this conversation. Once again, this has been a Manhood Moments, No More Hiding podcast. And we're just thankful for everyone that's joining us. If you've not subscribed to our channels, please make sure you hit the subscribe button if you're on YouTube. If you're not on YouTube, go to our No More Hiding for Men YouTube channel and subscribe. Also, let us know what you think about this. We're excited about being able to serve the community and serve men. And lastly, to our men that's listening in, we want you to know that this is your year. This is your time to come out of hiding and move into your purpose. So no matter what you're dealing with, there is someone here that can help support you. As we go before God in prayer, and we thank God for what he's done, Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your grace and your mercy, how you touched, how you blessed us. We're asking, God, that you would continue to bless our speakers and these great men as they lead school systems and school districts. Remember the stakeholders, our teachers, all the staff, our students, the communities that's being impacted by their leadership. And we're praying that you raise up more men like these who can be a voice, who can be an impact, who can be salt and light in this day. What we really need, that voice of a man. Remember those who listened in, those who've been a part of No More Hiding, and those who are yet to come. We ask you to continue to bless, continue to cover, continue to have your way. This we ask in your holy name. Amen. Amen. So until next time, right? We'll see you in 2 weeks on the 17th, February 17th. That's that third Thursday of February. And until that time, my manhood, my mission. Thank you.